My guest at this time is Kevin Hermening. Kevin is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, and at the age of 20 in 1979 became the youngest of the American hostages held in Iran for 444 days. As we approach the 40th anniversary of that very difficult history for our country, Kevin joins me to remember how it started and what those days were like in Iranian captivity. And Kevin, thanks very much for being with us.
Well, a real pleasure to join you and your listeners, and look forward to a good conversation.
Kevin, you joined the U.S. Marine Corps right out of high school. How did that decision ultimately get you to Iran?
Well, I signed up for the Marines with a guaranteed contract to go into accounting, and indeed I went on to some accounting school, working in the supply field. Went down to North Carolina for my training. I was really fortunate, graduated top in my class for that brief stint, and chose to go to Okinawa, Japan, where I did serve for 15 months. I was so very fortunate to get promoted twice in that 15-month period. So it was while I was in Okinawa that I learned about the Marine Security Guard program, and I went to a meeting. It was in the base theater, and as you can imagine, they've got big posters of Marines in dress blues uniforms, big, full, glossy, full-size almost banners, photos of Marines in front of the Taj Mahal and the Eiffel Tower and the Great Wall of China, and I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. I went to the meeting, went to work the next morning, and asked my gunnery sergeant if he had any familiarity at all with the program. He did not, and nonetheless agreed to write a letter of recommendation for me. Came back to Quantico, Virginia in May or June of 1979 for our training as a Marine Security Guard. We started our class with 179 students. It was the first class that had both male and female Marines in it for the MSG program. And 11 weeks later, whatever it was, graduated. Only 121 of us out of the 179 completed the training successfully. And I got my assignment to go to Germany. And I thought, this is terrific. I'm going to be assigned in the middle of Europe at the U.S. Embassy in Germany, and certainly I'm going to learn the language. I'm going to be driving 150 miles an hour on the Autobahn, and I'm going to be able to go skiing in the Alps every other weekend. Well, that was my vision. That was the plan after I got my orders. And I came back on leave just before I was to head out. I got back to Quantico to gather my belongings and head overseas, and the sergeant major called me into his office and informed me that there had been a mistake, and they had accidentally assigned a Jewish Marine to go to Tehran, Iran, and I was going to be taking his place. Now, in the context of mid-1979, it's really not that much of a stretch for me to say that the first words out of my mouth to the sergeant major were, "Sir, excuse me, but where's Tehran?" So in today's environment, we all know where Iran is on the world map in the world. In 1979, early 1979 anyway, not so much. And so when I think back on it today, the very idea that they might have assigned a Jewish Marine accidentally to go to the U.S. Embassy in Tehran would have been just horrible for him. I'm not saying I'm glad that I was a stand-in for him, but it would have been worse for him from a treatment perspective, because there was one Jewish hostage, Barry Rosen, who had just horrendous treatment. He wasn't a Marine, but one of the State Department folks, and he had just horrendous treatment, including because of his faith.
Now, I don't know if you were briefed then or later, but obviously the revolution was already ongoing by the summer of 79. In fact, there had been a very brief hostage incident in February of that year. So what were you told to expect, and what were your first impressions once you got there?
Well, as a young Marine sergeant, I was very fortunate to have been promoted to the rank of E5 sergeant 15 months after I left for boot camp. I had all the responsibility of a sergeant E5 in the Marine Corps, but at age 20, having just turned age 20, I had very little of the capability or skills of being a leader. And so I was excited about the opportunity to go back overseas. We were not briefed on the environment in the countries in which we were going to be based. That took place on site once we got there. And so when the other three guys and I got off the plane in the middle of the night in Tehran at Mehrabat International Airport, and we were greeted by armed guards and a bunch of mullahs running around, as well as all the revolutionaries, it was quite disconcerting, to be sure. The next day, found myself, of course, going through briefings and training, and I thought two things. Wow, what did I get myself into? But secondarily, I thought to myself, wow, I'm in the middle of something. I'm in the middle of a country which is consequential in that era and time. And little did I know just how consequential events would become over the course of the next 3 months.
How tense was it right outside the U.S. Embassy or wherever you were posted there on a regular basis?
Well, early on, I would not describe them as tense or intense even. Things were pretty relaxed when we first arrived during the day. We would quite often be able to go out to the local shopping district. The Marines, once a week, we would get in our big van, and other than the guys on duty, the rest of us would head up into the mountains north of the city and do our PT, our physical training, do our running and such. We had visitors over from the British Embassy and the Canadian Embassy and the Australian Embassy. We would play cards, we'd drink beer, we'd have a good time. We'd play softball out on the big 23-acre sprawling compound that comprised the U.S. Embassy in 1979. We would play football with one another. I enjoyed the first 3 months we were there, 2.5 months anyway. And then that's when the Shah of Iran was given the go-ahead to come into the United States for his medical treatment. Of course, the Shah, the former leader before the Ayatollah Khomeini took over, the Shah was very ill, suffering from cancer. And so the U.S. government, President Carter, made the decision to admit him into the Philadelphia Cancer Center, and he was there for cancer treatment for a few weeks until the U.S. government ultimately decided that he should leave the country of the United States, because within that intervening time, the U.S. Embassy was overrun, we were taken captive, and the beginning of the hostage ordeal began.
I'm speaking with U.S. Marine Corps veteran Kevin Hermening. He was the youngest American hostage held for 444 days in Iran. November 4th marks the 40th anniversary of the Iranians taking the Americans hostage. In part 2 of my conversation with Kevin, which you can also find on this same site, we'll take you to November 4th, 1979, and the day the Americans were taken captive. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.